Chapter 11. The day we arrived at the village was very rainy and we were all drenched to the skin. We were assigned a very comfortable quarters with a large, comfortably furnished room that we could use as dining and a sitting room. This room was exceedingly warm and cheery, and one of our parties asked where the heat came from. We all looked around but could not find a stove or any place where the heat came from. Although there was a warm glow that was very noticeable, we wondered at this, but did not say much, as we were becoming accustomed to surprises and were quite certain that all would be made plain later on. We had just seated ourselves at the dining table when Emile and 4 others came in. We did not know where they came from. They all appeared at one end of the room simultaneously, and at the end of the room where there were no openings. They appeared there without any noise or display and walked quietly to the table where Emile introduced the others. Then they sat down as though perfectly at home. Before we realized it, the table was filled with good things to eat, but no meat. These people do not eat meat nor anything that has had conscious life. After the meal was finished and we were sitting around the table, one of our party asked how the room was warmed. Emile said, "The warmth that you feel in this room comes from the force that we are all able to contact and use. This force or power is higher than any of your mechanical forces of power, but can be contacted by man and used as light, heat, and power, even to the driving of all mechanical appliances. It is what we call universal force. If you contact and use this force, you would call it perpetual motion. We call it universal power, God power, supplied by the Father to work for all of his children. It will turn and move every mechanical device, furnish transport without the consumption of fuel in any way, and will also furnish light and heat. It is everywhere present without money or price and can be contacted and used by all." One of our party asked if the food had been prepared by this force. We were told the food came prepared as we had eaten it, directed from the universal, just the same as the bread and the other provisions had been supplied hitherto. We were then invited by Emile to accompany the group to their home about 200 miles distance, where we would meet Emile's mother. He went on to say, "My mother is one who has so perfected her body that she is able to take it with her and go on and receive the highest teachings. Therefore, she is living in the invisible at all times. She is doing this from choice, as she wishes to receive the highest, and by receiving the highest teaching, she is able to greatly assist us. In order to make this clear to you, I might say that she has gone on until she has reached the celestial realm, as you would call it, the place where Jesus is. This place is sometimes called the seventh heaven. To you, I suppose this suggests the mastery of mysteries. Let me say that there is no mystery about it. It is a place in consciousness where every master is revealed. Those who have reached that state of consciousness are outside the mortal vision, but they can return and converse and teach those who are receptive. They can come in their own bodies, for they have so perfected their bodies that they can go where they will with them. They are able to return to earth without reincarnation. Those who have passed through death are obliged to be reincarnated in order to return to earth with a body. This body was given to us as a spiritual perfected body, and we must so see and keep the body in order to retain it. Those who have left the body and have gone on in spirit now realize that they must again take up a body and go on and perfect it. It was arranged, before leaving the table that evening, that the party should divide into 5 groups, each group in charge of one of the 5 that had appeared in the room and taken dinner with us. This would enable us to cover a large field and would greatly facilitate our work. At the same time, it would enable us to verify such things as traveling in the invisible and thought transference. This plan would give us at least 2 of our men in each party and one of the 5 as leaders. We would be quite widely separated, yet we were to keep in touch through those who were so greatly befriending us and giving us every opportunity to prove their work. Chapter 12. The next day all details were arranged, and 3 of our party, including myself, were to accompany Emile and Jast. The morning following found each party with its guide and attendant, all ready to depart in different directions, with understandings we would carefully observe and record all that occurred, and should meet 60 days later at Emile's home in a village just spoken of, 200 miles distance. We were to keep in communication with each other through friends. This was accomplished each evening by these friends conversing with each other or traveling back and forth from party to party. If we wished to communicate with our chief or with any other member of our party, we all need do was to give our message to our friend, and in an incredible short time we would have the answer. In giving these messages, each would write them out in full and note the time of the minute on each message. Then when the answers came, we would do the same. When we came together again, we compared notes and found that all notes corresponded. Aside from this, our friends would travel from one camp to another and converse with us. We kept accurate records of these appearances and disappearances. Also, we noted the time and place, the conversation, and all checked carefully when we compared notes later. At times after this, we were widely separated. One party would be in Persia, one in China, one in Tibet, one in Mongolia, and one in India, always accompanied by our friends. At times they traveled in the invisible, as we call it, distance as great as 1,000 miles, and kept us informed as to the happenings and progress of each camp. The destination of the party to which I was assigned proved to be a small village to the southwest, located on a level plateau well up in the foothills of the Himalayas, about 80 miles from our starting point. We did not take any provisions for the trip, but we were amply provided for at all times and had very comfortable quarters. We arrived at our destination early in the afternoon of the 5th day, were greeted by the delegation of villagers and shown a comfortable quarters. We noted the villagers treated Emile and Jas with utmost reverence. We were told that Emile had never visited the village, but that Jas had been there before. The occasion of his first visit was in response to the call for help to rescue 3 villagers from the fierce snow men that inhabit some of the wildest parts of the Himalayas. This present visit was in response to a similar call, and also to minister to the sick who could not leave the village. These so-called snowmen were outcasts and renegades who have lived in the snow and ice regions of the mountains until they have developed a tribe that is able to live in the mountains' vastness without contact with any form of civilization. Though not numerous, they are very fierce and warlike, at times capture and torture those who have unfortunate enough to fall into their hands. To prove that 4 of the villagers had been captured by these wild snowmen, the villagers, being at their wits' end to know what to do, had sent out a message to get in touch with Jast, and he had come to the rescue, bringing a meal to use alongside. Of course, we were all excited, thinking we were to get sight of these wild people whom we had heard of, but often did not exist. We at first believed the rescue party would be organized and we would be allowed to join, but these hopes were shattered when Emil announced that he and Jas would go alone and that they would go immediately. In a few moments they disappeared and did not return until the second evening with the four captives, who told weird tales of their adventures of the strange people that had captured them. It seemed that these strange snow people go entirely naked, that their bodies have become covered with hair like that of the wild animal, and that they can withstand the intense cold of the mountain altitude. They are said to move over the ground very swiftly. In fact, it is claimed that they are able to pursue and capture the wild animals that live in the region that they inhabit. These people, called the masters, the men from the sun. And when the masters go among them for the prisoners, they did not resist. We were also told the masters had made a number of attempts to reach these wild people, but these attempts had come to naught because of the fear in which the people held them. It is said that if the masters do go among them, the snow men will not eat or sleep, but stay in the open night and day. So great is their fear. These people have lost all contact with civilization, even forgetting that they had ever contacted with races or they are the descendants from them. So far have they separated themselves from others. We were able to get Emil and Jas to say but little about the strange wild tribe, nor could we influence them to take us to them. When we questioned, the only comment was, "They are God's children, the same as we are, only they have lived so long in hatred and fear of their fellow men that they have so developed the hatred and fear faculty that they have isolated themselves from their fellow man to such an extent that they have completely forgotten they are descendants of the human family and think themselves wild creatures they appear to be. They have gone on in this way until they have been lost the instincts of the wild creatures, for the wild creature knows by instinct when human beings love it, and it will respond to that love. All we can say is that man brings forth that which he gazes upon and separates himself from God and man. In this way he can go lower than the animal. It would serve to purpose to take you among them. It would instead harm these people. We are in hope someday to find someone among them who will be receptive to our teachings. In this way reach them all. We were told that if we wished to make the attempt to see these strange people on our own initiatives, we were at liberty to do so, that the masters could no doubt protect us from the harm, and if we should be taken prisoners, they could in all probability secure our release. We found that evening we were scheduled to leave the next day for a very ancient temple about 35 miles from the village where we were then stopping. My two companions decided they would forego seeing the temple and try to get a closer view of the wild men. They attempted to influence two of the villagers to go with them, but in this they met flat refusal, for none of the villagers would leave the village so long as they thought the wild men were around. My friend decided to attempt it alone, so after receiving instruction from Emil and Jas as to the trail and general direction, they strapped on their sidearms and made ready to start. Before they left, Emil and Jas had exacted a promise from them that they would shoot to kill only as a last resort. They may shoot to frighten as much as they pleased, but they must give their word that if they kill, it would be the last extremity. I was surprised that we had even a 45 Colt with us, as we had not carried firearms about us. I had discarded mine long ago and did not know where it went. It so happens that one of the coolies that helped to look after our wants had put two pistols in the luggage, and they had not been removed. So, chapter 13. In about 20 minutes, Instagram may click off. So, whoever's on Instagram, if we click off, it's just that Instagram only allows us about an hour to be on. They used to allow us to be on for the whole 2 hours, but something changed that. Chapter 13, Emil. Jast and I started out later in the day to go to the temple and arrived there the next day at 5:30 in the evening. We found 2 elderly men in charge and I was made comfortable for the night. The temple is located on the high mountain peak, is built of rough stone and said to be over 12,000 years old. It is in a perfect state of preservation and repair. It is one of the first temples erected by the Siddha teachers and was erected by them as a place where they could go and have perfect silence. The site could not have been better chosen. It is on a highest peak in the part of the mountain. The elevation above the sea level is 10,900 feet. It is over 5,000 feet above the valley floor. The last 7 miles, it seemed to me, the trail was straight up. At times, it led over poles that were supported by ropes fastened to the boulders above, then thrown over the cliffside. These supported the poles that were as a trail. As we walked over these poles, I realized they were at least 600 feet in midair. At other times, we were obliged to climb pole ladders supported by ropes from above. The last ascent was perpendicular for about 300 feet and was accomplished wholly by a pole ladder. When we arrived, I felt as if I were on top of the world. We were up before the sun the next morning, and when I stepped out on the roof of the temple, I forgot all about the ascent of the night before. The temple was so situated at the edge of the bluff that when you look out, you could see nothing for 3,000 feet below. It seemed as if the whole temple were suspended in midair. I had considerable difficulty in persuading myself to believe otherwise. In the distance we could see 3 mountains upon which, I was told, temples similar to this were located. But they were so distant I could not make out a temple with my field glasses. Emil said that one of the other party should have reached the temple on the farthest mountain at about the same time we arrived here last evening, and that our chief was in the party. He said that if I wished to communicate with him, I might do so, as they were at the time standing on the roof of the temple a good deal like we were doing. I took my notebook and wrote that I was standing on the roof of the temple 10,900 feet above sea level, and it seemed to me as if the temples were suspended in midair. At the time was exactly 4:55 a.m. by my watch, and the day was Saturday, August 2nd. Emil read this message and stood silent a moment. Then the answer came. Time 5:01 a.m. by my watch. Place suspended in midair, 8,400 feet above sea level. Date Saturday, August 2nd. View wonderful, but situation most remarkable. Then Emil said, if you wish, I will take this note and bring the answer when I return. I would like to go and converse with those at the temple if you do not mind. I gave him the note willingly, and he disappeared. An hour and 45 minutes he returned with a note from the chief stating that Emil had arrived at 5:16 a.m. and that they were having a wonderful time speculating what would come next. We stayed at the temple 3 days. During the time, Emil visited the other parties, carried notes from me, and returned with answers from them. The morning of the 4th day, we prepared to return to the village where we had left my associates. I found that Emil and Jas wished to go to another small village located in the valley about 30 miles from where our trail left the valley trail. I suggested they go and I accompany them. We camped that night on a sheep herder's lodge and were up and started early the next morning in order to reach our destination before dark the next day. As we were walking, we were not able to use horses on the trip to the temple and so had left them at the village. About 10 o'clock that morning there came on a heavy electric storm, and it looked as if there would be a downpour, but no rain fell. The country through which we were passing was quite heavily wooded, and the grounds was covered with a heavy, thick, dry grass. The country seemed exceptionally dry. The lightning ignited the grass in a number of places, and before we knew it, we were virtually surrounded by forest fires. In a few moments this fire was raging like mad, closing in upon us from three sides with the swiftness of an express train. The smoke was settling down in thick clouds, and I became bewildered and panic-stricken. Emile and Jas seemed cool and collected, and this reassured me somewhat. They said, "There are two ways of escape. One is to try to get to the next creek, where there is water flowing through a deep canyon. If we can reach this canyon, which is about 5 miles away, we can, in all probability, make ourselves safe until the fire has burned itself out. The other way is to go on through the fire with us, if you can trust us to take you through." Instantly all fear left me, and I realized these men had proved true in their emergencies. Throwing myself, as it were, wholly upon their protection, I stepped between them, and we proceeded on our way, which seems to be in the direction of the fire was raging the most. Then immediately it seemed as if a great archway opened before us, and we went on directly through the fire, without the least inconvenience, either from smoke or heat, or from the burning branches strewn along the trail under our feet. There were at least 6 miles of this fire-swept area that we passed through. It seemed to me as if we were as calmly walking along the trail as though there were no fire raging around us. This went on until we crossed a small stream, and then were out of the fire. While we were going through the fire, Emile said to me, "Can you not see how easy it is to use God's higher laws to replace a lower one when you really need the higher? We have now raised the vibration of our bodies to a higher vibration than that of the fire, and the fire does not harm us. If senses mortal could see us now, they would think we had disappeared, when in reality our identity is as it has always been. In reality, we actually see no difference. It is the concept of the mortal sense that loses contact with us. Could they see us as we are? No doubt they would think that we had ascended. In reality, that is what happens. We do ascend to a place of consciousness where the mortal does lose contact with us. All can do the same as we are doing. We are using laws given to us by the Father to use. We are able to use this law to convey our bodies through any space. This is the laws we are using when you see us appear and disappear, as you call it, annihilate space. We simply overcome difficulties by raising our consciousness above them. In this way, we are able to overcome and come up over all limitations that man in mortal consciousness has placed upon himself. To me, it has seemed as if we were going over the ground with our feet just touching it. When we were safe across the stream, out of the fire, my first impression was that I had awakened from a deep sleep and had dreamed this. But I gradually awoke to the realization of it all, and the real meaning of it began to dawn upon my consciousness. We found a shady place on the bank of the stream, ate our lunch, and rested for an hour, then went on to the village. Chapter 14. These are really short little chapters. This village proved very interesting as these are certain well-preserved records that translate appeared to be conclusive evidence that John the Baptist resided in the village for about 5 years. We were afterwards to see records and have them translated, which seem to prove conclusively that he resided in this country for about 12 years. We were later on shown records that would seem to prove that John the Baptist sovereigned with these people through Tibet, China, Persia, and India for about 20 years. In fact, we felt we were about to follow almost the same route he followed by the records left and preserved. These were of such interest that we returned to a different village and made an extensive search and found by comparing the data thus obtained, we could compile quite an accurate map of his travels while with these people. At times, these happenings were brought so vividly before us that we could imagine ourselves traveling over the same ground and taking the same route that John did so long ago. We stopped in this village for 3 days. During these days, a wide vista of the past unfolded before me. I could see these teachings going back into the dim past, to the very beginnings whence all came forth from the one source or substance, God. I could see the different offshoots of these teachings being put forth by individuals, each individual adding his concept, each thinking it was his, revealed to him by God, or a direct revelation from God to him alone, each feeling that he had the only true message and that he was the only one to give his message to the world. In this way, the mortal concepts were mixed with that of a true revelation intended, and diversity and inharmony resulted. Then I could see these people, the master, standing firmly on the rock of the true spirituality, perceiving that man is truly immortal, sinless, deathless, unchanging, eternal, the image and the likeness of God. It seemed to me that further research must prove that these great people have preserved and handed this truth down the long ages in its unadulterating state. They do not claim to have all there is to give, nor do they ask anyone to accept anything, unless they can prove the words themselves and do the work of the masters do. They do not claim any authority save the actual work they do. After 3 days, I found Emil and Jas were ready to return to the village where we had left my associates. Their mission to the village had been purely a healing one, and there was no doubt but that they could have made the trip to the temple and this village in far less time than it had taken us. I was not able They could make the trip to this village where we had. Okay, I'm way no. We arrived at the village and found my associates waiting for us. Their search for snowmen had come to naught. They had searched for 5 days. They had given up in disgust and were returning to the village when their attention was called to what seemed like to be the form of a man outlined against the sky on the ridge about a mile distance. Before they could bring their field glasses to bear upon him, he had so far disappeared that they were able to obtain only a glimpse. This glimpse gave them the impression of an ape-like form covered with hair. They hurried to a place but did not find any further evidence. Although they spent the remainder of that day searching and surrounding countries, they could find no further evidence and gave up the search after hearing my report. My associates wanted to return to the temple, but Emil said we would visit a similar one within the next few days, and they decided to forego the second trip. Quite a number of people from the surrounding countries had congregated at the village for healing, as couriers had gone out to the tidings of the rescue of the four who had been captured by the snowmen. We stopped over the next day and attended to the assembly, and some saw remarkable cures. One young woman about 20 of age, who had her feet frozen in a previous winter, had them restored. We could actually see the flesh grow until they were normal. She walked with perfect ease. Two blind men had their eyesight restored. One of them, we're told, was born blind. There were a number of minor cases healed. All seemed profoundly impressed by the work. After the assembly, we asked Emile whether there were many converts. He said a great many were really helped, and in that way their interest was aroused. They would for a time become workers, but the greater part of them soon fell back into their old ways of living, as they found it would be too much exertion to take up the work in earnest. The people nearly all lived an easy, carefree life, and there seemed to be about 1% of those that profess to believe that they are really in earnest. The rest depended entirely upon others to help them when they get into trouble. Right here is where a great deal of their trouble lies. The Master says they can assist everyone and that really desire help, but they cannot actually do the work for anyone. They can tell others of the abundance in store for them, but to be actually one with of the abundance, each individual must accept and prove it for himself by actually knowing and doing the work. Chapter 15. We left the village the next morning, and two of the villagers who seemed to have taken up the work accompanied us. The evening of the third day we came to a village about 12 miles from the one where I had been and had looked over the records regarding John the Baptist. I was very anxious to have my associates look over these records, so we decided to stay over, and Jas accompanied us to the village. After going over the records, my associates were deeply impressed, and we laid out a plan to map and follow and travel as outlined in the records. That evening, the Master, who was with the fourth party, spent the night with us. He also brought messages from the first and the third party. He had been born and raised in the village. His forefathers had written the records, and they have been in the family from that time on. It was claimed that he was the fifth generation removed from the writer, and that not one of the family had experienced death. They had all taken their bodies with them and could return at any time. We asked if it would be too much trouble for the writer of the records to come and talk with us. He said that it would not, and we arranged for the interview that evening. We had been seated about a few moments when a man whom we judged to be about 35 appeared suddenly in the room. He was introduced to us and all shook hands with him. We were all spellbound by his appearance, for we had imagined that he would be very old. He was above a medium height and rugged features, but the kindest face I had ever looked upon. There was strength of character back of every move. His whole being emanated a light that was beyond our power of comprehension. Before we were seated, Emile, Jast, and the two strangers clasped hands in the center of the room and stood in perfect silence for a few moments. Then all were seated, and the one who had appeared in the room so suddenly began by saying, "You have asked for this interview in order to get a better understanding of the documents that have been read and interpreted for you. I will say these records were made and kept by me, and those referring to that great soul John the Baptist, which seems to surprise you so greatly, are actually occurrences of the time he was with us here. These records show that he was a man of a wide knowledge and wonderful intellect. He perceived that our teaching was true, but he apparently never came to the actual realization, for had he done so, he would never have seen death. I have sat in this room and heard John and my father converse, and it was here that he received much of his teachings. It was here that Father passed on and took his body with him, and John beheld his passing. There are none of my family on the father's or mother's side that have not taken their bodies with them in passing. This passing means the perfection of the body spiritually, until one becomes so conscious in the deep spiritual meaning of life or God that one sees life as God sees it. Then one is privileged to receive the highest teachings, and from this realm one is able to help all. We never descend from this realm, for those who have reached this place never wish to descend. They know that life is all progress and goes forwards. There is no turning back, and none wish to do so. All are reaching out to help those that are striving for more light, and the messages that we are continually sending out into the universe are being interpreted by God's children who are receptive in every part of the earth today. This is the prime objective of reaching this realm or state of consciousness, for we are able to help all in some way. We can and do talk with the instructor who instruct those who are receptive and who raise their consciousness, either through their own efforts or the assistance of another. Another cannot do the work for you, nor can another carry you along indefinitely. You must decide to do the work for yourself, then do it. Then you are free and self-reliant. When all comes into consciousness, as Jesus did, that body is a spiritual body and indestructible, and holds themselves in consciousness. Then we shall be able to communicate with all and give out the teachings we have received to a great number. We are privileged to know that all can accomplish all that we have accomplished, and thereby solve every problem of life, and that which has been looked upon as difficult and mysterious will be found simple. I do not see any difference to you from any other man than you meet every day, neither do I see any difference in you. We said we thought we could see something far finer in him, he answered. That is only a mortal as compared with the immortal of men. If you would only look for God quality and not make any comprehension, you would see every human being as you see me. Or by looking for the Christ in every face, you would bring forth that Christ, or good quality in all. We make no comparison. We see only the Christ or God qualities in all, at all times, and in that way we are out of your vision. We see perfection or have perfect vision, while you see imperfection or have imperfect vision. Until you are in contact with someone who is able to instruct you, until you can raise your consciousness, where you can see and converse with us as you are now doing, our teachings seem only inspirational in nature. It is not inspirational when we are conversing or attempting to converse with one. This is only in the nature of instructions leading to the point where the true inspiration can be received. It is inspiration only when it comes direct from God and you let God express through you. Then you are with us. The ideal image of the flower in the minutest details is within the seed and must expand, multiply, unfold, and be wrought into the perfect flower by hourly preparation. When this inner image is complete, in the minute detail, the flower comes forth beautiful. Just so God holds the ideal image of every child in mind, the perfect image where He wishes to express. We can get more out of this ideal way of expression than the flower does if we will but let God express through us in the ideal way He has conceived for us. It is only when we take things into our hands that the problem and difficulties begin. It is not for one or a few. This is for all. It has been shown us that we are not different from you. It is a difference in understanding, that is all. All the different isms, cults, creeds, all the different angels of all beliefs are all good, for they will eventually lead their followers to the realization that underneath all there is a deep factor of actuality that has been missed, a deep something that has not been contracted or contacted, or they have failed to contact that which rightly belongs to them, which they can and should rightfully possess. We see it is this very thing that will eventually drive man to possess all. The very fact that man knows there is something to possess, which can be possessed, and which he has not, will goad him on until he has it. It is in this way that every step in advance is made in all things. The idea is first pressed down from God into man's consciousness. He sees there is something ahead if he will but go on. Here man usually blunders and fails to recognize the source from which the idea came, but thinks it came wholly from within himself. He gets away from God, and instead of letting God express through him the perfection God sees for him, he goes on and expresses in his own way and brings forth imperfectly the thing which should be perfectly wrought or manifest. If he should but realize that every idea is a direct, perfect expression of God, and as soon as this idea comes to him, he would immediately make it his ideal to be expressed from God, then take his mortal hands off and let God express through him the perfect way. This ideal would come forth perfect. Here we must realize that God is above the mortal, and the mortal cannot help in any way. In this way, man would learn in a short time to express perfection. The one great thing man must learn is to get forever through and out of the psychic or mind forces and express directly from God. For all psychic forces are created wholly by man. They are likely to mislead. And that's all people are chasing everywhere. All trying to be psychics, all trying to be gurus, all trying to be all kinds of things for what? Chapter 16. Here the talk ended, and the understanding that all should meet at breakfast. We were up early next morning and ready for breakfast at 6:30. As we left our lodgings, we met our friends going in the same direction, walking along and conversing the same as ordinary mortals. They greeted us, and we voiced our surprise at meeting them in this way. The reply was, "We are only men, the same as you. Why do you persist in looking upon us as different? We are in no way different from you. We have only developed our God-given powers to a greater extent than you." We then asked, "Why can we not do the works that we have seen you do?" They answered, "Why do you not all we contact?" Sorry, I missed the part there. "Why do not all we contact follow on and do the works? We cannot and do not wish to force our way upon anyone. All are free to live and go the way as they wish to go. We try only to show the easy and simple way, the way we have tried and found it very satisfactory." We went to breakfast, and the conversation drifted into the ordinary everyday occurrences. I became lost in wonder. Here were 4 men sitting opposite us at the table. There was one that had lived upon the earth about 1,000 years ago. He had so perfected his body that he was able to take it with him wherever he desired. His body will retain the buoyancy and youth of a man of 35 years, and this perfection had been completed about 2,000 years ago. Next to him sat a man that was the fifth in line or regular descendant of the families first mentioned. The second had lived upon this earth far more than 700 years, and his body did not appear to be a day over 40. They were able to converse with us the same as any other men would converse. There was Emile, who had lived for 500 years and appeared to be about 40, and Just, who was about 40 and appeared to be about that age. All were conversing together like brothers, with not a hint of superiority, all kindly, simple, and yet well grounded and logical in every word uttered, with no trace of the mystical or mysterious about them. Just plain human beings in daily intercourse with each other. Still, I could secretly realize that it was not all a dream. After breakfast, when we arose from the table, one of my associates started to pay for the meal. Emile said, "You are our guests here," and held out the lady in attendance what we thought was an empty hand, but when we looked a second time, there was just an amount of money necessary to pay the bill. We found that our friends did not carry money with them, neither did they depend on others for their supplies. When money was needed, it was right at hand, created from the universe. We walked out of the house, and the man that was with the number 5 party shook hands with us, saying that he must return to his party, and disappeared. We made a note of the time of his disappearance, and afterwards found that he appeared with his party within 10 minutes after he had left us. We spent the day with Emile and Jast and our friends of the records, as we called him. In wandering over the village and the countryside, our friend recounting in detail many instances which happened in the time of John's sovereign for 12 years in the village. In fact, so vividly were the instances brought to our minds that it seemed as we were back in the dim past, walking and talking with this great soul who, to us before this, had seemed to be a mystical character, conjured from the minds of those who wished to mystify. From that day on, John the Baptist has been a real living character, so real to me it seems as if I can now actually see him walking the streets of the village and countryside, receiving instructions from those great souls about him. The same as we walked the streets of villages and countrysides that day, and yet not able to grasp the fundamental truth of it all. After trampling all day listening to the most interesting historical occurrences, the hearing records read and translated on the very spot where the incident took place thousands of years before, we returned to the village just before dark, thoroughly tired. The third friends who were with us had walked for every step of the way, and as we had walked, were not showing the least sign of fatigue or awareness, whereas we were begrimed, dust-laden, and perspiring. They were cool and at ease. Their garments were as white and fresh and spotless as when we started out in the morning. We had noted during all our journey with these people that none of their clothing became soiled. We had remarked about this great many times, but had received no reply until this evening when, in answer to the remark made, our friend of the record said, "This may seem remarkable to you, but it seems far remarkable to us that one speck of God's created substance adheres to another of God's creation, where it is not wanted or where it does not belong. With the right concept, this could not happen, for no part of God's substance can be misplaced or placed where it is not wanted. Then in an instant we realized that our clothing and bodies were as clean as theirs were. The transformation for us, it was a transformation, had taken place instantly to all three alike. While we stood there, all fatigue left us, and we were refreshed as though we had arisen from bed and had a morning bath. There was the answer to all our questions. I believe we retired that night with the deepest feelings of peace we had ever experienced at any time thus far throughout the sovereign with these people, and our feelings of awe was fast giving place to the deepest love of these simple, kindly hearted that were doing so much for the benefit of mankind, or their brothers, as they call them. We began to look upon them as brothers. They took no credit card or credit upon themselves, saying it was God expressing through them. Of myself, I could do nothing. The Father that dwelt within me, he doth the works. We'll see how far I get this next chapter. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, I'll finish this next chapter. Maybe I'll get one more after that. Chapter 17. We were up the next morning with every faculty alert with interest and wonder for what that day would reveal. We had begun to look upon each day as a revelation of unfoldment in itself, and felt that we were but beginning to realize the deep meanings of things we were experiencing. While at breakfast that morning, we were told that we would go to the village higher up in the mountains, and from that place we would visit the temple that was located on one of the mountains I had seen while standing on the roof of the temple already described. We were told we would only be able to use our house for 15 or horse, sorry. We were only able to use our horse for 15 miles of the journey, and that two of the villagers would go with us that far and would take the horses to another village further on and care for them until we arrived. We turned our horses over to the two villagers at the appointed place and started climbing to the village up the narrow mountain trail, which at the time proved to be steps hewn from the rock. We camped that night at the lodge located on the crest of the point, about midway between the place where we had left the horses and the village of our destination. The keeper of the lodge was fat, old, and jolly. In fact, he was so plump and round that he seemed to roll rather than walk, and we could scarcely tell he had eyes. As soon as he recognized a meal, he began asking for healing, saying, as we were told afterwards, that if he did not get help, he would surely die. We were told that he and his forefather had kept this lodge and served the public for hundreds of years, and that he had been in charge about 70 years. About the time he took over the lodge, he healed of what was called an inherited disease and supposed to be incurable. He had become a very active worker for about 2 years, then gradually had lost interest, began to depend upon others to help him out of his difficulties. This had gone on for about 20 years, and he had seemed to prosper, seeming to enjoy the best life, when suddenly he dropped back into his old ways, from which he would not make the necessary effort to arouse himself from his lethargy. We found that his case was only a fair example of thousands of others. These people live simply and easily, and anything that requires an effort becomes a burden to them very quickly. They soon lose interest, and their prayers for help become a mechanical sound instead of something uttered with deep meaning or desire. We were up and on our way early the next morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, morning, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon found us at the village, with the temple of our destination perched on a rocky pinnacle almost overhead. In fact, so steep were the walls that the only means to approach was by a basket attached to a rope and let down by a pulley supported by wooden beams made fastened in the rock. One end of the rope was attached to a windlass and the other was passed over the pulley and fastened to the basket. The basket being let down and pulled up in this manner, the windlass was located in a little room hewn from solid rock of the ledge that jutted out so that it overhung the rocky walls below. The wooden dredge to which the pulley was attached swung out so the rope and the basket just cleared the edge, make it impossible to haul the load up from below until it cleared. Then the basket and load were swung in and landed safely on the top of the ledge, on the little rock room hewn out for the purpose. This rock ledge jutted out over the rock wall below so far that the baskets swung out in midair for about 50 or 60 feet as it traveled up and down. At a given signal, the basket was lowered. We stepped in and were hauled up one by one to the ledge 400 feet above. When we were landed upon this ledge, we began looking for some trail leading up to the temple, the wall of which we could see standing up flush with the wall of rock that still towered 500 feet above. We were told that we would make the ascent in a similar manner to that already described. As we looked, a derrick arm corresponding to the one on the ledge where we were standing swung out. A rope was let down and attached to the same basket. We were hauled up one by one and landed on the roof of the temple 500 feet above. I again felt as if we were at the top of the world. The temple was located on a rocky pinnacle that stood out 900 feet above all of the surrounding mountain. The village we had left 900 feet below was located at the summit of a mountain pass used in crossing the Himalayas. We found this temple was about 1,000 feet lower in elevation than the one that we had visited with Emil and Jas, but it commanded a much wider outlook. From where we stood, it seemed as if we could look into the infinite space. We were made comfortable for the night, and our three friends told us they were going to visit some of our associates and would take any message we wished to send. We wrote messages, carefully dating them, giving our location, including the time of day. When we handed our friends these messages, they shook hands with us, saying they would see us in the morning, disappeared one by one. We made careful note of the time and of what we had written, and found afterwards that the messages were at their destination within 20 minutes of the time they left our hands. After eating a hearty supper served by attendants, we retired for the night, but not to sleep, for our experiences were beginning to make a deep impression upon us. Here we were, nearly 9,000 feet in the air, with no human beings near us except the attendants, with not a sound except of our own voices. There did not seem to be a breath of air stirring. One of my associates said, "Do you wonder that they chose the location of these temples as a place of meditation? The stillness is so intense one can fairly feel it. It certainly is a place in which to meditate." He then said he was going outside to have a look around. He went out, but returned in a few moments, saying there was a heavy fog and nothing could be seen. My two associates were soon asleep, but I could not sleep, so I rose, dressed, and went out on the roof of the temple and sat down with my feet hanging over the wall. There was just enough moonlight filtering through the fog to eliminate the inky blackness that would have prevailed had not the moon been shining. There was just enough light to reveal that the great billowing fog banks rolling by, enough to remind me that I was not suspended in space, that somewhere way down the earth was, as ever, and that place I was sitting upon was somehow connected with it. Then all of a sudden, it seemed as if I could see a great pathway of light, its rays widening like a fan with a wide part extending towards me. Where I was sitting seemed to be in about the center of an ever widening ray, and the central ray was the most brilliant of them all. Each ray seemed to project outwards in its own course until it illuminated one part of the earth. Each illuminated its own particular portion of the earth until the whole blend in the great white ray. Looking far ahead, I could see only gradual convergings until they ended up one central point of intense white light, so white that it seems transparent and crystal. Then instantly it seemed as if I stood out in space looking at it all. Looking far, far down at the white ray, I could see what seems to be specters of a faraway past, marching on and on in ever increasing numbers, but in solid ranks until they reached a certain place. Then they separated wider and wider until they filled the whole of the light ray and covered the entire earth. They all seemed to emerge at first from one central light point of light. They seemed to come forth from this point. First one, then just ahead were two, then just ahead of them were four, and so on, until they reached the place of wide divergence, where there were about 100 abreast in solid fan-like array. When they came to the point of wide separation, they suddenly scattered widely, occupied all of the light paths, and each marched on more or less alone until they seemed to occupy the whole earth. When they had occupied the whole earth, it seemed the rays had reached their widest expanse. Then they grew gradually narrower and narrower until the rays again converged into one point from which they first started. The cycle was complete. They entered again one by one. Before they entered, they formed a solid ray 100 feet abreast, gradually closing up until they became one. And that one entered the light alone. I suddenly aroused myself, thinking that this was rather an unsafe place to be dreaming. I went in and retired. So I'm going to see how long this one is, if I'm going to read it or not. So I'm just going to read this next chapter, and that's going to be enough for reading. Chapter 18. We had asked one of the attendants to call us at the first sign of daybreak, and almost before I knew it, there came a rap on the door. We all bounded out of our beds, so eager were we to see the first break of day from our lofty perch. We were dressed in no time and went rushing out on the roof like three eager schoolboys. In fact, the noises we made so startled the attendants that they rushed up to see if we were really in our right minds. I suspect that noise the three of us made was more noise than had ever been disturbed the peaceful quiet of the old temple since the days it was built. This we learned was more than 10,000 years ago. In fact, it was so old that it looked a part of the rock upon which it rested. When we arrived on the roof, there was no need to ask a question. One look and my associates' eyes and mouths went wide open. I suspected had anyone looked at mine, they would have seen the same. I waited for them to speak. Almost in one breath came the explanation. "Why are we surely suspended in mid-air?" they said. The sensation was exactly like that I had experienced in other temples. They had forgotten for the moment that there was anything under their feet, and the sensation was that they were floating in mid-air. One remarked, "Do not wonder that these men can fly after experiencing this." We were aroused for our berries by the laugh, and all turned to find Emile and Jast, our friends of the record, standing close beside us. One of my associates walked quickly up to them, tried to grasp all of their hands at once, and said, "This is wonderful. We do not wonder you are able to fly after you have been here for a time." They smiled, and one said, "You are free to fly as we. You only need to know that you have the power within you to do so. Then use the power." We then turned to the outlook. The fog had lowered and was floating in great billowy waves, just high enough so that not the foot of the land could be seen anywhere, and the movement of the banks of fog all around us gave a sensation we were being carried on noiseless wings along with the fog, standing there looking far out. One lost sense of anything underfoot, and it was very difficult to believe that we were not floating in space. As I looked out, it seemed as if my floating above the roof. I had so far forgotten myself that when one of the party spoke, my feet hit the roof with such a force that I felt the effects of the jar for several days after. At breakfast that morning, we decided to stay over for 3 days, as we expected to visit only one other place of interest before going on to the appointed meeting place. Upon reading the message Emil had brought, we heard that the chief's party had visited this temple only 3 days before. After breakfast, we went out and found the fog gradually clearing. We watched it until it cleared entirely. The sun came up. We could see the little village nestling close in under the cliff and the valley far below. Our friends decided to visit the village. We asked if we might go with them. They laughed and said we could, but they thought we had better use the basket, as we would present a better appearance if we did than if we attempted their mode of travel. So we lowered one by one to the ledge, then down to the little plateau just above the village. No sooner had the last steps from the basket that our friends were there. We went down to the village and spent a great part of the day. It was a quaint old place, typical of those mountain districts, with its houses built by digging into the side of the cliff, then closing up the openings with the rock wall. There were in all about 20 of these houses. We were told that the houses were built in this manner to keep them from being crushed by the heavy snows in winter. The villagers soon began to gather, and Emil talked to them for a few moments. It was arranged that a meeting should be held the following afternoon, and couriers were sent out to notify those of the neighborhood who wished to attend. We were told John the Baptist had lived at this village and received instruction from the temple, and that the temple remained the same as when John received his instructions there. We were shown where the house had been torn down. That afternoon, when we returned to the temple, the weather had cleared so that we could see a wide expanse of country. We were shown the trail that John had used in going to and from the temple, and the different villages where he lived. The temple was supposed to have been built and the village established more than 6,000 years before John visited there. We were shown the trails we would take when we departed, and were told the trails had been in use since the temple was built. About 5 o'clock that afternoon, our friends of the record said he would leave us for a time. He then shook his head, saying he would see us soon, and disappeared. That evening we saw a most remarkable sunset from the roof of the temple I have ever witnessed, and it has been my good fortune to have seen the sunset in nearly all lands. As evening advanced, a light haze was gathering over the low range of mountains that bordered the wide expanse of tablelands which we could look down upon. When the sun reached this rim, we were seemingly far above it, that it appeared as if it were looking directly down upon the sea of molten gold. Then came afterglow, and the very mountain peaks appeared to be aflame. Those in the distance were covered in snow, seemed to be blanketed with fire. Where glaciers filled the ravines, it appeared as though they were shooting forth great tongues of fire, and these flames appeared to meet and melt with the different hues in the heavens. The lakes that dotted the plains below were transformed suddenly into volcanoes belching forth fire, which descended and blended with the colors in the heavens. For one moment it seemed as if we were standing on the bank of a silent inferno. Then all blended into one harmony of color, and the soft, peaceful quiet was beyond description. We sat on the roof until after 12 that night, asking Emil and Jas questions. These questions pertained particularly to the people and the history of the country in general. Emil quoted literally from their records. These records prove that this country was inhabited thousands of years before our history began. Emil went on to say, "While I do not in any way wish to disparage or make light of your history or of those who wrote it, I will say that at the beginning of this history, the historians did not go back far enough, but took for granted that Egypt meant that the name implied outer darkness or the wilderness. It really meant the wilderness of thought. At the time, as now, a large portion of the world was in the wilderness of thought. They did not go far back of it to get the deeper meaning. They accepted what they saw or heard and what appeared on the surface, recorded it, and your history began. It is quite difficult to correlate the two, and I would not attempt to say that you must take ours as authentic. I would suggest you choose for yourself." The moon then disappeared over the far-off mountains. We sat and watched it around and full until it rose nearly overhead. It was a beautiful sight with an occasional light cloud passing by an elevation just above us. When these clouds went drifting by, it seemed as if the moon and clouds were standing still and we were drifting past them. This went on for an hour, when suddenly there was a noise as if some object thrown to the roof behind us. We started to our feet and we looked around. There stood a middle-aged lady, smiling and asking if she had startled us. Our first impression was that she had jumped from the parapet of the roof, but she had only stamped her feet to attract our attention. The stillness had been so intense we had gradually magnified the sound. Emil stepped forward quietly, greeted her, and introduced us to his sister. She smiled and asked whether she had intruded on our dreams. We then sat down, and in a short time the conversation drifted into the reminiscence of her experiences. She has 3 sons and a daughter that had been raised in the work. She replied that the youngest 2 were always with her. We asked if we might see them. She replied that they could come there that evening, and immediately 2 figures, a man and woman, appeared. They greeted their uncle and their mother, then came forwards and were introduced to the 3 of us. The son was tall, erect, manly fellow, whom we took to be about 30 years of age. The daughter was not tall, rather slight, with very fine features. She was a fine, well-poised girl, whom we judged about 20 years of age. Afterwards we found that the son was 115 and the daughter was 128 years old. They were all to be present at the meeting the next day and soon went below. After they had retired, we passed complimentary remarks about the son and daughter. The mother turned to us and said, "Every child born is good and perfect. There are no bad children. It does not matter whether they are conceived in the perfect or immaculate or through the sense of material ways. The one conceived in the perfect way will soon recognize his sonship with the Father, that he is the Christ or Son of God. Then he will develop and unfold quickly. He will see only perfection. The one conceived through the senses, way, may also immediately recognize his sonship, perceive that the Christ is in him, and may realize his perfection by idolizing the Christ. He gazes upon that ideal, loves and cherishes it until he manifests or brings forth that which he gazes upon, the Christ. He is reborn and is perfect. He has brought forth perfection from within himself, or that perfection which was always there. The one held to the ideal and was perfect. The others perceived the ideal and unfolded that ideal and regained perfection. Thus, no child is bad. All are good and from God. Here one of the parties suggests that it was bedtime as it was past 12 o'clock. So I'll leave off there and I'll pick up tomorrow.